All right, so I promised a Q&A. You guys queued all A. Any tips on reading faster? I use a mixture of audiobooks and physical reading. I'm a software developer, so 8 hours a day I am at a desk coding, and while I am doing that, I am listening to Audible at 1.5 speed. Question for you to hopefully answer in your Q&A. How do you feel about themes and lessons in the books you read? Do you learn from them and try to apply them to your own life? Do you just kind of enjoy them? Or are you different, or are you indifferent to them? There's a mixture. I always kind of keep in mind that this is just some author's lesson. It's just some guy trying to impart some kind of lesson to me. So I don't just like take it like word of God ever. There's certainly some times that I've kind of been like, okay, this is like a good lesson, but in general, it's never usually anything that deep. Way of Kings does have some cool, interesting perspectives in terms of theme that I think might be worth kind of thinking on as a person. But very rarely does a book by a fantasy author kind of make me sit back and go, whoa. More often it's books by kind of classic authors like Hemingway who kind of do more explorations of humanity that have made me kind of sit back and think that. Because fantasy doesn't really get grounded in our world. I kind of have a harder time connecting that to my world. Have you read Red Rising yet? No, but I think I looked it up a while ago because maybe you commented about that before. I'm not sure, but I've been, honestly, I feel bad because I've been telling people I'm going to read a bunch of stuff, but it's going to be like 2020 by the time I get to most of it. There is my list of books. Well, it's just very few of these have been read. I've maybe read a third of them, and 2/3 I need to get through, plus all the requests from viewers. It's gonna be a slog because apparently that's a word that I use now. But I'll get to them. I promise. It's just gonna be time. What are your 3 favorite non-fantasy/sci-fi books? Great question. Number 3, without giving it too much thought, would be the first 3 books in the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. I'm just gonna count 3 books as one because they're all one series. Number 2. This book on Alexander the Great, he is my favorite historical figure for many, many, many reasons. I find him to be the most interesting human being that ever lived. And so reading through this book and learning about him was one of the most enjoyable reading experiences in my life. I love Alexander the Great, and if you do not know much about him and you want to learn about the greatest, most influential historical figure ever, arguably, check him out. I mean, every conqueror since Alexander the Great has wanted to be him. Caesar wanted to be Alexander the Great. Napoleon wanted to be Alexander the Great. And number 1, which I have mentioned a couple times, and I'm sure anyone who's watched a lot of my channel would know, is The Old Man and the Sea. I'm a huge Hemingway nerd. I think his simplistic but eloquent writing style is underappreciated by younger readers, and I think is absolutely something more people should go back to and take another look at. Hemingway is magnificent, and another very interesting historical figure if you want to learn about someone else who is certainly worth reading about. Just wondering, will you do a character examination for Matt from the Wheel of Time? There are about 5 people I plan on doing that are currently on the list, and he is high up there. The next one, though, is another character from the Wheel of Time. Guess down below who it is, because it's my favorite Wheel of Time character. What about that other bookshelf from a couple of months ago in that living room area? That was my dad's library, actually, and I was still living with him, learning, going to software school at the time, so that's where that was from. This is the start of my own personal bookshelf, and actually this isn't all my books. I still have a bunch up in Maryland where I used to live, so I need to go get those somehow and bring them back down. And another question, exactly what types of music and or artists does Greene like? Right now, a person I listen to by far the most is Kendrick Lamar. I'm grateful to be alive while he's making music. He is on Bob Dylan level of social commentary. But throughout my life, probably the artist I've listened to the most is probably a tie between Queen and the Beatles. I like Chance the Rapper. I like his brother Taylor Bennett. Yeah, there's just an amalgamation of all kinds of weird stuff. I'm not really loyal to one artist, but right now I just listen to a bunch of Kendrick because I feel like I'm learning while I'm listening to him. What do you think of fantasy tropes? Do you like them in a book? Do you prefer books that don't contain them? Do you think they are necessary to books? Here's the thing. Fantasy tropes, they're gonna happen. there's two ways you can, as an author, you can handle fantasy tropes. You can embrace them and just go with them, and I'm very fine with that as long as it's well done. Or you can avoid them, and if that is well done, I'm fine with that. I don't have a preference one over the other. But what I don't like is when it feels like an author is trying really hard to avoid every fantasy trope. There's certain examples of that. I don't want to call it a book right now, but there's examples of that where it just feels like an author's trying really hard to take a left turn away from that, and at that point you're hurting your own story because you're putting effort into just avoiding something that could just be a natural continuation of your story. So that's the only thing in that situation where I'd say it really bothers me. Why do you think Wheel of Time is better than A Song of Ice and Fire? I've read both and loved Wheel of Time, but seems to follow many fantasy tropes that I'm able to predict what happened in the future without any real mystery, in my opinion. That's a very, very good question and a very, very good point. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. My personal preference is for Wheel of Time. I want to make a very distinct distinction between those two things. One being better than the other you could debate that endlessly. That's going to be all about semantics. But in my personal preference, I like Wheel of Time more. And for me, Wheel of Time is not about the mystery. There are no real mysteries in Wheel of Time that you can't call. You're absolutely right on that. But Wheel of Time is much more about the journey. Now, I like that. I like the characters in Wheel of Time a whole lot more. But the reasons that I kind of don't enjoy Game of Thrones as much is I just found so many of the characters to just be what they are and very predictable as a character. I mean, you're saying Wheel of Time's story is predictable. I find the Song of Ice and Fire's characters to be very predictable and not super deep. And again, that's not a very common opinion, and I'm willing to admit I'm fairly wrong on that in a lot of ways. It's just coming down to personal preference. And again, I would never say Game of Thrones is bad. I don't think I've ever said that. I'm just saying it's not my personal preference. And I do respect the author quite a bit and what he was able to do with a series that has now boosted the fantasy genre as a whole. I'm very grateful to the author for that, but it's just not my personal taste. What would you name your sword if you had one? I like the idea of naming things what they are, so I would name my sword Sword, and I would say Sword to Come. Which is the most important book you have ever read, like the one that changed your life or the one that helped you through a bad period of your life? Wheel of Time, all of it, easily. I was going through a rough patch when I picked it up, and I kind of pick it up anytime I'm feeling down or depressed. It's just brain candy to me at this point. It's not the deepest thing in the world, but it's what I use for comfort food. I'm curious if you ever take notes while reading or prepare for videos. You know exactly what to say. I actually answered this in the comments, but I want to go ahead and just make a clarification. Very often for my videos, I've taken no notes at all and rant and ramble. Pretty much all my reviews and one of my character evaluations, I just kind of rambled. And the only ones I take extensive notes are the summaries, because I feel like that kind of requires extensive notes. I can't just go in and recite a book. Maybe a couple of the Wheel of Times, but not most of the ones I've summarized in general. I just like kind of talking and rambling, and I edit the crap out of them to make it coherent and sound decent. How old are you? I am 23. And this person goes on to talk about how I speak. I was a communications major in college, and I did a whole lot of public speaking and speeches, and I actually really, really enjoy that. Public speaking is one of my favorite things to do. I tried doing stand-up comedy. I've done improv. I really enjoy expressing and giving my thoughts and opinions and emoting, so it's just kind of something that's always stuck with me, and half the reason I make these videos is to continually exercise that muscle of being able to publicly speak, because I never want to get rusty. And as I'm doing this software developing job, which is a great career that I'm happy I'm in, I just want to keep sharp at my ability to talk good. Question: what were your thoughts when you first time watched/read The Lord of the Rings? First time I watched it, it was one of the first fantasy movies I ever watched, because I was a little kid when they came out, and I thought they were the most magnificent pieces of cinema that were ever created, and that anyone who thought anything was better was wrong. Of course, I was wrong at the time, but they are amazing, and that was kind of my first impression, because I think I was like, they came out in 1999, so I was 6. I'm a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings movies, and the books I did not appreciate the first time I read them as much because I was really young. I think I was like 14, maybe 13, and I did not appreciate them as much as I should. Now that I have reread them, of course, that has changed. You can simply watch my Lord of the Rings review and understand my thoughts on people who do not appreciate the Lord of the Rings for what they are. Did you major in English? No. communications, as I said, talk good. That was my whole spiel. Question for your Q&A. What are some fantasy cliches that you could do without? Basically, the women who sleep around being bad people is something that is very common in fantasy and bothers me. Because I'm a feminist. I advocate for women to be able to do whatever the hell they want, whenever the hell they want, and not be judged for it. And it seems to be something that a lot of fantasy authors are not quite there on. I'm also kind of getting tired of the old wise wizard character. When they're done great, like Moraine or Gandalf, it's fantastic and they're really enjoyable. But many people just kind of copy and paste Gandalf, and that can get old. It's the one character that authors seem to put the least amount of effort into making their own out of. The same kind of witty, wise, occasionally smart, cracking old wizard character is just kind of getting tired to me. But when they're done really well, I can't even lie, I like them a lot. I could also do without the kind of MacGuffin item that is the end-all be-all. The Lord of the Rings with the One Ring was great, but there's so many series now that have their one ring that it's just... Okay, just stop having one little thing be the source of power that everyone's fighting over. That gets very tired very quick. And this is something that Wheel of Time is very guilty of, having a chosen one that is a mystery that's not a mystery. Please stop. I'm so done with that. It's so bothersome. Again, Harry Potter is guilty of this. Wheel of Time is guilty of this. A bunch of stuff I've reviewed but given positive reviews to recently is guilty of this. It's just stop with having the chosen one be someone who it's a mystery who they are. It's not really a mystery. I'm tired of it. Let's just have it so that no one's really a chosen one, and the story develops a character without this MacGuffin behind them that'll push them to wherever they need to be. That's just something that really, really bugs me. That is the last question that I was going to go through. So that was my Q&A. You guys did a great job queuing. I hope I did a good job A-ing. And please let me know if I should do one of these in the future. Feel free to ask me more questions in the comments, because I'm usually pretty good about answering things in the comments, but not always. And I'm sorry, that's because they've started coming in kind of rapidly, and I can't always catch them before they're off my little feed that I look through. Have a good one, like and subscribe, all that fun stuff, and enjoy your Sunday and the future.